My name is Wayne Harris. That name now might make people think of newspaper articles, glittering headlines about a man who went from being a janitor to a millionaire. But if you ask me about my early days, I'll tell you about a birthmark, a large, ugly, reddish-purple patch clinging to my left cheek. It wasn't just a mark on my skin. It was the source of all my pain, the scorn I faced, and the journey I embarked on to prove I wasn't the worthless person they said I was. I was born into a comfortably middle-class family in a suburban American town where white wooden houses with low fences and neatly trimmed lawns lined the streets. Our Harris home stood on Maple Street, a two-story house with a red-tiled roof and windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun. My father, Robert Harris, was a banker, always dressed in crisp suits, his voice deep and authoritative. My mother, Ellen, was a sharp-witted woman who loved hosting tea parties with her neighborhood friends. My older brother, David, 5 years my senior, was the pride of the family with his stellar academic record and a smile as radiant as the sun. My sister, Emily, 2 years younger than David, was beautiful and skilled, always praised by my mother for her embroidery and dancing. And me? I was the youngest, the unexpected child, and worse, the child with the birthmark. The day I was born, the delivery room wasn't filled with the joy typical of family stories. I heard my mother recount, her voice cold, that when the doctor held me up, the room fell silent. "What's that on his face?" my father asked, his voice trembling, not with emotion but with horror. My birthmark, the size of a child's hand, reddish-purple like a bruise, stretched from my cheek to my chin. The doctor said it was just a harmless skin defect, but to my family it was like a curse. My mother looked at me, not rushing to hold me, but turning to my father, whispering, "How could this happen? He'll ruin the family's image." I don't remember that moment, but my mother's cold, cutting words, sharp as a knife, etched themselves into my mind as I grew up. In my earliest days, I was unaware of my ugliness. All I knew was that my mother rarely held me, that my father often looked at me with distant eyes as if I were a defective item to be returned. David and Emily, the siblings I thought would love me, were the first to call me cruel names. "Dirty face," David would sneer, smirking as I reached for his toy. Emily was subtler but no less vicious. She'd glance at me, shake her head, and tell her friends, "That's my little brother, but don't mind him, he's weird." Weird. That word, gentle yet sharp, cut into my heart like a blade. I remember the days sitting in the living room watching the family gather around the fireplace, laughing and sharing stories. My father would ruffle David's hair, praising his intelligence. My mother would hug Emily, showing off the new dress she'd sewn. And me? I sat in the corner of the sofa clutching an old teddy bear, trying not to let anyone see the longing in my eyes. I wanted to be like David, like Emily, loved, noticed. But every time I spoke up, trying to share a childish story, my mother would interrupt. "Wayne, don't bother us. Can't you see we're talking?" My father wouldn't even look at me, just muttering, "Go play somewhere else, Wayne." That big house with walls adorned with family photos had no place for me. In group pictures, I was always pushed to the edge, or my mother would deliberately angle my face to hide the birthmark. "Smile, Wayne," she'd say, but her tone wasn't encouraging. It was a command. I tried to smile, but it was never genuine. How could I smile when every day I felt like a stain on the perfect portrait of the Harris family? When I started kindergarten, things got even worse. Other children, with the innocent cruelty of youth, didn't miss a chance to mock me. "What's wrong with your face? Did you get hit?" one kid asked, and the group burst into laughter. I tried to explain, my voice trembling. "It's just a birthmark." But no one cared. They called me monster, red face, and each time I felt myself shrink as if I truly were a monster unworthy of existing. I remember one time during art class, I tried to draw a picture of my family. I drew my father, mother, David, Emily, and myself in the middle with a big smile. The teacher looked at the drawing and smiled, but then a classmate shouted, "Why'd you draw your face all red? That's gross." The whole class roared with laughter, and I wanted to disappear into the ground. I tore up the drawing, threw it in the trash, and never drew my family again. At night, lying in bed, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering why I was born this way. Why wasn't I like David or Emily? Why couldn't I be the child my parents loved? I hugged my pillow, tears soaking the pillowcase, and told myself that one day I'd make them see me differently. But back then, I was just a boy, and that dream felt as distant as the stars outside my window. My family never protected me from the mockery. Once I told my mother about being teased at school, hoping she'd hug me and say I was okay, that I was still her son. But she just looked at me, sighed, and said, "Wayne, you have to learn to deal with it. Life isn't easy, especially for you." Those words hit me like a hammer to the chest. Even my mother, who was supposed to love me unconditionally, saw me as a burden. My father was worse. He never said it outright, but his eyes said everything. Whenever I tried to talk to him, ask about his work, or share something about my day, he'd nod absently, or worse, ignore me as if I didn't exist. Once I overheard him talking to my mother in the kitchen, his voice low but clear enough for me to hear. "It would have been better if he hadn't been born." Those words, sharp as a knife, cut deep into my heart. I ran to my room, slammed the door, and vowed never to let them see me cry. My grandmother was the only one who looked at me differently. She lived a few blocks away in a small house filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies. Whenever I visited, she'd pull me onto her lap, stroke my hair, and say, "You're a gift from God, Wayne. This birthmark is just God's way of marking you for something special." I didn't fully understand, but her words were like a ray of sunlight piercing my cold heart. She'd tell me fairy tales about boys rejected by the world who still found their own path. I'd hug her, breathing in her lavender perfume, and feel loved, even if just for a fleeting moment. But my grandmother passed away when I was 11. Cancer took her so quickly that I didn't get to say goodbye. Loneliness flooded back like a tidal wave. She was my only light, and now that light was gone. At her funeral, I stood by the casket, clutching my mother's hand, hoping for comfort. But she brushed my hand away, saying, "Don't do that, Wayne. People are watching." I stood there, silent, tears streaming down my birthmark cheek. That birthmark wasn't just a patch of skin. It was a wall separating me from my family, my friends, the world. It was a daily reminder that I didn't belong, that I was an extra, a mistake of creation. But deep inside, a small flame began to burn. I don't know where it came from. Maybe my grandmother's stories, maybe the pain that had built up too long. That flame whispered that I couldn't let the birthmark define me. I couldn't let others scorn decide who I was. In those years, I learned to survive. I learned to keep my head down in crowds, to smile even when my heart was breaking, to pretend I didn't hear the whispers behind my back. But every night, alone with the darkness, I made a promise to myself. One day I'd make them see me. Not with pity, not with contempt, but with respect. And that was the beginning of my story. The story of a boy with a birthmark, rejected by the world, but never stopping his fight to find his place. I entered my teenage years with a heart full of scars, but also with an iron will I didn't know I possessed. Perhaps it was forged from the times I was called Red Face on the schoolyard, from the cold stares of my parents, from the mocking words of David and Emily. I was no longer the boy who cried silently in his room every night. I was still in pain, still lonely. But I had learned to hide my hurt behind a tough exterior. I told myself that if the world wouldn't accept me, I would force it to. I threw myself into studying, not because I loved books, but because I thought it was the only way to prove my worth. I dreamed of college, a place where, just maybe, people would judge my mind instead of my face. I spent hours in the library reading, doing homework, and imagining a future where I could stand tall and hold my head high. But whenever I mentioned my college dreams to my father, he'd scoff. "College? Wayne, don't indulge in pipe dreams. Who'd hire a guy with a face like yours for an office job? You should learn a trade, something practical." His words hit like a punch to the chest, but I was used to punches like that. I just nodded, stayed silent, and kept my dreams in the shadows. David and Emily, now young adults, grew even more distant from me. David, with his basketball scholarship and admission to a prestigious university, was the family's pride. Emily, with her beauty and charm, was always the center of every party. They no longer called me dirty face like they did when we were kids, but their looks still dripped with contempt. I graduated high school with a diploma and a heart full of cracks. I hadn't given up on my college dream, but my father crushed it decisively. "College money isn't for wasting on you," he said, his voice cold as stone. "You should get a job, earn money, take care of yourself." I wanted to scream, to tell him I could do it, that I wasn't the failure he thought I was. But I just bowed my head as I had 1,000 times before and nodded. I shelved my college dreams and started looking for work. My first job was cleaning houses for a small local cleaning company. I scrubbed floors, washed dishes, vacuumed, and took out the trash. Jobs people thought suited someone like me. Every day I wore a grayish-green uniform, pulled a cap low to partially hide my birthmark, and went from house to house, working until I was exhausted. Every night I'd collapse onto the bed in my small basement room at my parents' house, my body aching but my mind still racing. I asked myself, is this all I'll ever do? Is this the life I deserve? My family never missed a chance to remind me of my place. One evening, during a rare family dinner where I was allowed to sit at the table like an actual member, David looked at me and smirked. "Tired from cleaning trash all day, Wayne? It really suits you." Emily giggled while my mother kept her head down, eating as if she hadn't heard. My father said in an even tone, "At least he's earning money. Not everyone can do office work like David." I gripped my fork tightly, wanting to throw it down, to shout that I wasn't a failure. But I stayed silent, swallowing my pain along with the cold slice of meat. The cleaning job wasn't just grueling, it was humiliating. Some clients looked at me with pity, others avoided me as if my birthmark were contagious. Once, while I was cleaning windows at a large house, the homeowner passed by, glanced at me, and said to her friend, "Poor kid with a face like that, he probably can't do much else." I pretended not to hear, but her words stabbed at my self-esteem like knives. I wanted to quit, to run away, but I had no other options. No money, no education, no support. I only had myself. But in those dark days, something strange happened. While scrubbing floors, taking out trash, and enduring mockery, I began to realize something. I didn't want to be the one who always bowed my head. I didn't want my birthmark, my family, or anyone else to define me. I started paying attention to the small details in my work: how to clean glass without streaks, how to arrange items to make a room look tidier, how to speak to clients so they felt respected. I wasn't just working for money. I was working to prove I could do well, that I wasn't useless. Every night back in my room, I wrote in an old notebook, not a diary, but ideas. I jotted down ways to improve work processes, how to treat clients better, how to make cleaning more than just cleaning. I didn't know where those notes would lead me, but they were my way of holding on to hope, of keeping alive the small flame my grandmother had ignited in me. I told myself, I can't keep being looked down on. I'll do something great whether they believe in me or not. The cleaning job to many was lowly work, but to me it was a door. I realized that even in the most undervalued profession, there was room for excellence. I began working with an almost obsessive attention to detail. I polished windows until they gleamed like mirrors, arranged clients' belongings to make their spaces feel larger, and always smiled, even when that smile hid the pain in my heart. I wasn't just working for money. I was working to prove I could do better than anyone else. One day, while cleaning a large house in an affluent neighborhood, the homeowner, Mrs. Thompson, paused and looked at me. I was wiping down a window frame, sweat dripping down my forehead, but I was meticulous with every motion. She said, her voice full of surprise, "You work so hard, Wayne. I've never seen anyone clean windows as spotless as you do." Her words, simple but sincere, were like a ray of sunlight breaking through my gray sky. I smiled, thanked her, but inside I felt a surge of new energy. For the first time, someone saw my work, not the birthmark on my face. Mrs. Thompson began recommending me to her friends. "Wayne does excellent work," I overheard her say on phone calls. "Call him, you won't be disappointed." From one client, I gained 2, then 5, then 10. The homes I cleaned weren't just spotless. They felt warm, as if I'd breathed life into every corner. Clients started trusting me not just because I did a good job, but because I listened to them. From their small complaints to their long stories about their lives. I realized this job wasn't just about cleaning, it was about building relationships, earning trust. But my family's view of me didn't change. One evening, I came home in my rumpled uniform, my shoes caked with dust, while my family was gathered for dinner. David looked at me and smirked. "Still a janitor, Wayne? Keep it up. Maybe you'll be the king of janitors someday." Emily giggled beside him, and my mother just shook her head, as if I were an irredeemable disappointment. My father, as usual, said nothing, engrossed in his newspaper as if I didn't exist. I wanted to shout that I was doing well, that clients praised me, that I could do more than this. But I stayed silent, retreated to the basement, shut the door, and kept writing in my notebook. That notebook was now thicker, filled with the ideas I'd been nurturing. I wrote down ways to organize work schedules more efficiently, how to train employees to work with the same dedication as me, even an idea for a simple app to let clients book cleaning appointments. I didn't know how to turn those ideas into reality, but they made me feel like I was moving forward, even if only in small steps. Then one day an opportunity came, not with fanfare but quietly, like a seed falling to the ground. I was cleaning for a new client, Mr. Jenkins, who owned a small shop in the town center. He was an older man, friendly, and notably he didn't look at me with pity. One time, after I finished cleaning his shop's kitchen floor, he sat down, handed me a glass of water, and asked, "Wayne, how long have you been doing this?" I answered, a bit hesitant. 2 years, sir." He nodded, looking at me with curiosity. "Have you ever thought about being your own boss? You've got talent." Mr. Jenkins' words hit me like a bolt of lightning. My own boss? I'd never dared to think that far. I was just a cleaner with no degree, no capital, no support. But he continued, "I see how you work. You don't just clean, you make things better. If you started a small business, I bet clients would line up." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes were serious. "Think about it, Wayne. Don't let others decide who you are." That night, I couldn't sleep. Mr. Jenkins' words echoed in my mind. I opened my notebook, reread my notes, and for the first time, they didn't feel like idle thoughts. They were a plan. I started calculating. I'd saved a little money from 2 years of work, not much, but enough to start something small. I thought about hiring a few people, buying more tools, and trying my luck. I decided to name the company Clearway Services. Clearway meant a clear path, not just because we cleaned thoroughly, but because I wanted this to be my path out from under the shadow of contempt. I hired 2 former colleagues, people like me, hard workers who were never recognized. I taught them my approach, not just cleaning, but making a difference. We started with small contracts, cleaning homes, offices, shops. I worked day and night, not just as a laborer, but as a manager, planner, and problem solver. My family, of course, knew nothing about my first steps. To them, I was still just the janitor, and I knew I had no obligation to explain my future plans to them. Clearway began to grow, and clients started coming in. They weren't just satisfied, they were impressed. An elderly woman down the street told me, "Wayne, you made my house feel brand new. I'm telling my entire book club about you." A coffee shop owner called, praising my team's professionalism. From those compliments, I felt something I'd never had: respect. Not from my family, not from those who once mocked me, but from strangers who saw the value in my work. Clearway Services wasn't just a small company, it was my dream. my way of proving I wasn't a failure. Every new contract, every satisfied client was a brick in the path I was building. I knew I still had a long way to go, but for the first time in my life I felt I was on the right track. The birthmark on my face was no longer a curse. It was the mark of a man writing his own story, one step at a time. In those days, Clearway Services was my entire world. I woke up at 5 in the morning, checked the work schedule, and assigned tasks to my team, now expanded to 5 employees. We were a small group, but I always told them we weren't just cleaning. We were making a difference. But even as Clearway grew, I knew that small house and office cleaning contracts wouldn't be enough to take us to the next level. I wanted more, not just for the money, but to prove that a guy like me, the janitor with an ugly birthmark, could achieve great things. In my old notebook, I wrote, "Find a big contract, a turning point, a chance to change everything." I didn't know where that chance would come from, but I believed it would. Just as my grandmother once said that fate always finds those who don't give up. That opportunity arrived on an autumn afternoon with golden leaves blanketing the town's streets. I got a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end belonged to Richard Baxter, the manager of the region's largest shopping center, Starlight Plaza. "I heard about you from Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "She says you're reliable. We're looking for a new cleaning team for the center. Want to give it a shot?" I nearly dropped the phone. Starlight Plaza wasn't just a small shop or a regular house. It was a massive complex with dozens of stores, a movie theater, and restaurants, drawing thousands of people daily. A contract with them wasn't just about money. It was a chance for Clearway Services to step into the spotlight. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, sir. I'd love to try. When can I meet you to discuss?" Baxter chuckled lightly over the phone. "Friday, 2 o'clock. Don't be late, Wayne." I hung up, my heart pounding like it might burst out of my chest. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for, but also the biggest challenge I'd ever faced. Starlight Plaza wasn't like the homes I'd cleaned. It demanded a larger team, more complex processes, and a level of professionalism I hadn't yet had to meet. But I wasn't afraid. I'd lived my whole life under skeptical stares and scornful words. A big contract was just another battle I had to win. In the days leading up to the meeting, I worked non-stop. I researched Starlight Plaza, studying everything from its layout to the history of cleaning companies that had worked with them. I learned the previous company lost the contract due to disorganization, leaving dirty floors and overflowing trash bins. I took notes on everything, mapped out priority areas, and calculated the number of staff needed. I also started thinking about a bold idea, using technology to manage the work. I wasn't tech-savvy, but I knew an old high school friend, Tommy, who had studied IT. I called him and shared my idea for a simple app to assign schedules, track progress, and collect client feedback. Tommy laughed. "Wayne, you're trying to turn cleaning into high tech?" I replied, my voice firm. "Why not? If I do it well, I'll make everyone take notice." The meeting with Baxter came faster than I expected. I wore the only cheap suit I owned, trying to angle my face to hide my birthmark. But Baxter wasn't the type to care about appearances. He looked me in the eye and asked about my plan for Starlight Plaza. I laid it all out, how I'd organize the team, ensure no corner was overlooked, and my idea for an app to streamline operations. I told him Clearway didn't just clean. We brought a level of professionalism no other company in the area could match. Baxter listened, nodded, and finally said, "You've got 1 week to prove yourself. Start Monday. Don't let me down." I left his office, my feet practically dancing with joy, but also weighed down by pressure. 1 week. I had 1 week to make my dream a reality. I gathered my team, now 8 strong, and told them this was our biggest opportunity yet. "If we do this right," I said, "Clearway won't just be a small company anymore, we'll be number 1. They looked at me. Some smiled, some looked nervous, but all nodded. They trusted me, and that made me feel I wasn't alone anymore. We worked like mad that week. I led the team, cleaning every inch of Starlight Plaza, from the main corridors to the restrooms, from the massive glass doors to the food court. I checked every detail, corrected my crew's mistakes, and sometimes cleaned again myself if needed. I slept no more than 4 hours a night, but I didn't feel tired. Every time I saw a gleaming floor or heard a shop employee's praise, the fire inside me burned brighter than ever. On the final day of the trial week, Baxter called me into his office. I stood before him, heart pounding, trying to appear calm. He looked at me, gave a slight smile, and said, "Wayne, I've inspected the entire center. Not a single speck of dirt. Your team works like a machine. The contract is yours." I wanted to shout, to jump, but I just nodded and said, "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." As I left his office, I clenched my fists, feeling like the whole world had just opened up before me. The Starlight Plaza contract changed everything. Clearway's revenue skyrocketed far beyond what I'd ever dared to dream. I hired more staff, growing the team to dozens. I worked with Tommy to finalize the app, and it truly made a difference. Other companies couldn't compete with us, not because we were cheaper, but because we were faster, more efficient, and more professional. Clearway services started getting mentioned not just in our town, but in neighboring cities. New clients came, from large offices to hotels, and each contract was another brick in my dream's foundation. But my family still didn't know, or didn't want to know. Once I tried telling my mother about the Starlight Plaza contract, hoping she'd be proud. She just nodded and said, "That's nice, Wayne, but don't overdo it or you'll fail." David overheard and laughed. "Big contract? You're still just a high-end janitor, Wayne." I didn't respond. I'd learned I didn't need to prove anything to them. I'd prove it to the world, and one day, they'd have to see me differently. Clearway Services was no longer just a company. It was living proof that I could succeed. I started dreaming bigger. A chain of commercial cleaning services, contracts with stadiums, 5-star hotels. I knew the road ahead was still long, but I was ready. The birthmark on my face was no longer something I had to hide. It was the mark of a man who turned pain into strength, and I would use it to conquer everything. 10 years have passed since the day I secured the contract with Starlight Plaza, and my life has transformed in ways I never dared to believe possible. Clearway Services is no longer a small team cleaning houses. It has grown into a small empire, a chain of commercial cleaning services with hundreds of employees operating across major cities nationwide. We've taken on contracts I once only dreamed of: baseball stadiums, luxurious 5-star hotels, modern hospitals with gleaming corridors. Each contract is a victory, not just for the money, but because it's proof that I, Wayne Harris, the red face once despised, have achieved what no one thought I could. I remember the early days when Tommy and I sat in his small room, painstakingly refining the work management app. Now that app is the backbone of Clearway, coordinating hundreds of employees, thousands of contracts, and millions of square feet of cleaned space daily. I invested in technology, employee training, and building a brand that clients not only trust but take pride in working with. Clearway isn't just a cleaning company. It's a symbol of professionalism, of excellence in an industry often overlooked. Clearway's revenue soared past 7 figures, then 8. I'm no longer the young man in a grayish-green uniform pulling a cap low to hide my birthmark. I wear tailored suits, drive a luxury car, and own a sprawling wooden mansion in the suburbs, where I can stand on the balcony and look out over a lush green valley. I bought a yacht, not to show off, but to savor the feeling of freedom, standing on the deck with the wind in my hair, knowing I built all of this myself. The media started to take notice. A local newspaper ran a story. From janitor to millionaire CEO, the story of Wayne Harris. It detailed my journey from a boy shunned by family and friends to the head of a company worth tens of millions. They called me inspirational, proof that anyone can overcome adversity. I read the article, smiled, but deep down I knew the truth. I didn't do this to inspire anyone. I did it to prove I wasn't a failure, that the birthmark on my face didn't define me. But my family, as always, didn't share in that joy. No congratulations, no messages, no hugs. I sent the article to my mother, hoping she'd read it and feel proud. She only replied via text, "Good for you, Wayne, but don't let it make you arrogant." David, now a successful banker but still basking in his smugness, called and said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "Millionaire, huh? Still just cleaning, nothing special." Emily, who had just opened a small fashion boutique, didn't even bother to reach out. I wasn't surprised, but their words, their silence, still felt like knives in my chest. I was used to the pain, but it never truly went away. I began to distance myself from my family, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to protect myself. I stopped attending family gatherings, stopped trying to squeeze into dinners where I was always relegated to the corner of the table, an outsider. I built my own world, one where I was respected, seen for what I did, not my birthmark. I made friends who didn't care about my appearance, business partners, loyal employees, clients who became friends. They were my new family, the one I chose. One evening, sitting in my office overlooking the city's twinkling lights, I got a call from a reporter at a national newspaper. They wanted to interview me, to share my story with the country. "You're a phenomenon, Wayne," the reporter said. "From a janitor to a millionaire, people need to hear this story." I agreed, not because I craved fame, but because I wanted to send a message that anyone, even those rejected by the world, can rise and fight. The interview took place in a 5-star hotel, one of Clearway's major clients. I sat across from the reporter, the camera's lights shining on my face, and for the first time I didn't try to hide my birthmark. I spoke about the days of being scorned, the nights writing ideas in my old notebook, the Starlight Plaza contract, and how I built Clearway from nothing. She listened, nodded, and when I finished, she said, "Wayne, you're not just an entrepreneur. You're a warrior." Her words choked me up. I didn't cry. I'd learned long ago not to. But I felt a relief I'd never experienced before. For the first time, I felt seen. Not as a failure, but as a man who had conquered his own fate. But that victory wasn't complete. My family remained a thorn in my heart, a reminder that no matter how successful I became, they still wouldn't accept me. I no longer craved their approval as I once did, but I wanted them to see I'd gone further than they ever imagined. I wanted them to face the truth that the janitor they mocked was now someone the world knew. One day I did something I never thought I would. I bought a yacht and named it Freedom. Not to boast, but to remind myself I'd broken free from the chains of my past. I hosted a party on the yacht, inviting my new friends, business partners, and a few notable figures I'd met through work. Standing on the deck, looking out at the ocean shimmering under the moonlight, I felt I'd come a long way. I was no longer the boy hiding in the corner of the living room, nor the young man pulling a cap low to cover his birthmark. I was Wayne Harris, millionaire, CEO, and above all, a free man. But my family remained back in that old town with their unchanging stares and words. They didn't know about the yacht, the article, the million-dollar contracts. They still thought of me as Wayne, the ugly-faced kid only fit for cleaning. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt pity. Pity that they missed the chance to understand me, to love me. But I knew one day they'd have to face the truth. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to say anything. My success would speak for me. That summer, the Harris family decided to hold a vacation in Florida, a lavish trip my mother had planned months in advance. I heard about it vaguely through a relative, but there was no invitation, no phone call, no word from my father, mother, David, or Emily. I wasn't surprised. Family gatherings never had a place for me, and now, even as I had become an entirely different person, they still chose to exclude me from their perfect picture. The pain wasn't as sharp as it once was, but I still felt a cold void where familial love should have been. I decided not to let my mind dwell on that sadness. Instead, I headed to Florida too. Not to chase them, but to enjoy the life I had built for myself. My yacht, Freedom. A 60-meter masterpiece with walnut interiors and a deck that shimmered under the sun, was a symbol of my triumph. I hosted a party on the yacht, inviting close friends, business partners, and a few prominent figures I'd met through Clearway Services' major contracts. Among them were a baseball star, an actress featured in major magazines, and a businessman whose name regularly appeared on Forbes lists. They didn't come because I was rich. They came because they respected me for what I had built from nothing. The party on the yacht was one of the most unforgettable moments of my life. The Florida sea sparkled under the moonlight, waves gently lapping against the hull, and jazz music mingled with lively chatter and laughter. I stood on the deck, a glass of wine in hand, watching everyone talk and laugh, and felt a peace I'd never known. This was my world, not the cold living room of the Harris house, not the corner of the dinner table where I was forgotten, but a place where I was respected, seen for who I was. I didn't know that not far away on a beach my family was holding their own vacation. They had rented a luxurious resort complete with outdoor parties and carefully curated photos my mother arranged for social media. I had no intention of appearing before them, no plan to show off or shame them. But fate, as my grandmother once said, always has its own way. That day I crossed paths with my family in the middle of the ocean. I was on the deck chatting with a business partner when I heard the low hum of an engine in the distance. A small, outdated motorboat passed not far from Freedom. I squinted and my heart skipped a beat when I recognized the familiar figures. My father, mother, David, and Emily, all crammed together on that little boat. They were laughing, probably thinking they were enjoying a luxurious vacation. But as their boat passed by, Freedom, their eyes met mine. Me, in a tailored suit, standing among glamorous guests on a multi-million-dollar yacht. My mother froze, her hand gripping the boat's railing tightly. My father turned away, but I saw his shoulders stiffen as if trying to suppress his discomfort. David, with his usual smug grin, stared at me, but this time his smile lacked its usual sharpness. Emily, the sister who always treated me as invisible, widened her eyes, her mouth slightly agape, unable to believe what she saw. I said nothing, didn't wave, didn't do anything to draw attention. I just stood there, head held high, letting them face the truth. The Wayne they once scorned was now standing on a multi-million-dollar yacht, surrounded by people they could only dream of meeting. I don't know what they said to each other afterward, but I heard from an acquaintance that the sight of Freedom gliding past the Harris family's motorboat became the talk of our hometown. Someone posted a distant photo online with the caption, "Wayne Harris on a multi-million-dollar yacht while his family squeezes onto a motorboat. Who would have thought?" The gossip spread like wildfire, and this time my family couldn't pretend they didn't know. My mother, I heard, tried to stay composed when asked about it, but her voice trembled. "Wayne? Yeah, he's doing well." David and Emily, who always mocked me, fell unusually silent. They couldn't deny that I had surpassed anything they ever imagined. I didn't throw the yacht party to shame my family. I did it to live my life, to enjoy what I had earned through sweat and tears. But I can't deny that hearing about their reactions, I felt a twinge of satisfaction. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew for the first time they were forced to see me, not as the Wayne they despised, but as a man who had risen from the ashes on his own. Time passed and I continued living my life, distanced from the Harris family. Clearway Services kept growing and I was consumed with new contracts, business trips, and plans to expand the company internationally. But then a piece of news arrived, like a cold gust from the past. Emily, my sister, was getting married. I learned about it through a relative because, of course, I didn't receive an invitation. No call, no text, just the familiar silence, the way they always pushed me out of their lives. I wasn't surprised, but I still felt a sharp pang in my chest. Emily, the sister who once called me weird, who giggled when David mocked me, was about to start a new chapter of her life, and I was still the unwelcome one. I wondered if she ever thought of me even once, or if I was just a shadow in her memory, a brother she didn't want to acknowledge. But this time I decided to do something different. I didn't want to show up at Emily's wedding to cause a scene or boast. I wanted to leave a mark, quietly but powerfully, to remind them I was no longer the boy who bowed his head in the corner. Through a third-party company, I discreetly purchased the hotel where Emily was holding her wedding. Grand Horizon, a luxurious venue my mother had bragged about to the entire neighborhood as the perfect place for her daughter. I didn't tell anyone, didn't leave any trace. I just wanted to see how they'd react when the truth came to light. The wedding day arrived and I wasn't there. I was in my office hundreds of miles away reviewing Clearway reports. But I had arranged for the hotel's manager, Mr. Peterson, a loyal colleague, to carry out a small task. As the wedding reception was in full swing amid clinking wine glasses and soft music, Mr. Peterson stepped onto the stage, took the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the owner of Grand Horizon who has made this place a symbol of luxury. Please welcome Mr. Wayne Harris." The room fell silent. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the scene. My mother freezing, her wine glass trembling in her hand, my father frowning, trying to maintain composure but his eyes betraying unease, David clenching his fists, his jaw tight, and Emily the bride in her dazzling white dress, her face paling at the sound of the name she'd tried to forget. Mr. Peterson continued, his voice clear. "Mr. Harris regrets he couldn't be here today, but he sends his best wishes for happiness to the bride, Ms. Emily Harris, and thanks the family for choosing his hotel for this special occasion." I got a text from Mr. Peterson shortly after. "It went exactly as you wanted." The whole room was stunned. I smiled, not out of spite, but because I knew that moment was a full stop to my past. I didn't need to stand in front of them, didn't need to say anything. The truth spoke for me. I was the owner, I was the winner, and they could no longer deny it. Emily called me a few days later, her voice shaky. "Wayne, why did you do that? Why didn't you tell me?" I replied calmly, "Congratulations, Emily. I just wanted you to have a perfect wedding in a perfect place." She fell silent, and I knew she understood. I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it to remind her I was no longer the brother she once scorned. After Emily's wedding, I returned to my life. Long days in the office, meetings with partners, and plans to expand Clearway services to new cities. But something had shifted inside me. The moment at Grand Horizon wasn't just a victory over my family. It was a milestone in my own journey. I was no longer the boy craving recognition from those who turned their backs on me. I had found my own worth, not through their eyes, but through what I had built with my own hands. Thanksgiving came that year, and as always, the Harris family held a grand dinner at their home. I heard about it through a relative, but no invitation came my way. No text, no call. I wasn't surprised. Their silence had become a familiar part of my life. But this time, instead of feeling hurt, I decided to do something for myself. I didn't need to sit at the corner of their dining table, bowing my head to their mockery. I would create my own Thanksgiving, a celebration worthy of the journey I'd traveled. I had just purchased a sprawling $10 million estate in a lush green valley, with a luxurious wooden mansion designed in the warm, elegant style I'd always dreamed of. Understated, yet refined. That's where I decided to host my Thanksgiving dinner. I invited everyone who had been part of my journey, loyal Clearway employees, close friends, business partners, and even distant relatives who had looked at me differently than the Harris family. My father, mother, David, and Emily were not on the guest list. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew a real family wasn't about blood. It was about those who respected and loved me. That Thanksgiving night, my mansion glowed with light. The long dining table was elegantly set, with golden roasted turkey, creamy mashed sweet potatoes, and expensive wine bottles sparkling under candlelight. Laughter filled the air, blending with the gentle piano music from an artist I'd hired. I stood in the middle of the room looking at everyone, people who believed in me, who saw my worth even when my own family rejected me. I raised my glass, giving a toast. Thank you all for being here, for being part of this journey. This isn't just Thanksgiving. It's a celebration of new beginnings. of those who never give up. The room erupted in applause and a warmth spread through my chest. This was my family, not the ones who called me red face or failure, but those who looked at me with respect. I stepped onto the balcony, gazing out at the valley shrouded in moonlight, and whispered to myself, "Grandma, I did it. I found my path." Meanwhile, I heard the Harris family's Thanksgiving went as it always did, my mother boasting about David and Emily, my father recounting bank stories, and everyone laughing as if I didn't exist. But this time, I didn't care. I no longer needed a seat at their table, no longer needed their approval. I had my own world, and it was more beautiful than anything they could imagine. But the story doesn't end there. My success, from the yacht Freedom to the Grand Horizon Hotel, from national newspaper articles to the multi-million-dollar estate, finally forced the Harris family to confront the truth they had long ignored. One morning, as I was reviewing Clearway's financial reports, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice, for the first time in my life, lacked its usual coldness or indifference. "Wayne," she said hesitantly, I want to talk. It's been a long time since the family got together." I stayed silent, gripping the phone, feeling as if time had rewound to the days when I was a boy, yearning for a word of love from her. But I was no longer that boy. "Talk about what, Mom?" I asked, my voice calm but tinged with distance. She fumbled, speaking of wanting to mend ties, saying that you're still family after all. I listened, but each word only reminded me of the times I was pushed away from the dinner table, the mocking remarks, the scornful looks. After my mother came David. He sent a long email writing that he was proud of what I'd achieved, inviting me to dinner to talk like brothers. Emily called too, her voice sweeter than usual, apologizing for past misunderstandings. Even my father, who rarely spoke to me, sent a brief text. "You've done well, Wayne. I'd like to see you." I read their messages, listened to their calls, and felt a strange emptiness. These were the words I had craved for years, but now they felt like echoes from a past I'd left behind. I remembered the nights I cried silently in my room, the times I was called monster, the family gatherings I wasn't invited to. I recalled my father's cold stares, David's mocking smiles, and my mother's cruel silence. Their apologies now weren't sincere. They were a belated acknowledgement that I had risen beyond their control. I responded to them not with anger or resentment, but with honesty. I met my mother at a small cafe where she sat awkwardly, no longer the sharp-witted woman who once intimidated me. "Mom," I said, looking her in the eye, "family isn't where I was born. It's where I'm accepted. I found my real family, the ones who respect me, who stood by me when you and everyone else turned away." She bowed her head, her eyes glistening, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved, as if a final burden had been lifted. To David and Emily, I replied via text. "Thank you for your words," I wrote, "but I don't need to mend what was never there. I wish you both happiness." To my father, I sent a single line. "Thanks, Dad, but I've found my own path." I didn't need them anymore. Didn't need their late apologies or their attempts to reconnect now that they realized I was no longer the Wayne they once despised. I stepped onto the balcony of my wooden mansion, where the lush green valley stretched out before me, shimmering in the twilight. The cool mountain breeze rustled through my hair as if soothing the invisible scars I'd carried for years. I stood there, quietly watching the sun sink below the horizon, and for the first time in my life I felt complete peace. No more lingering pain, no more yearning for approval, no more weight of the past on my shoulders. I was free. Freedom wasn't just about owning a multi-million-dollar company, a yacht, or a lavish estate. Freedom was realizing that my worth didn't lie in others' eyes, but in what I had built, the people I had inspired, and the man I had become. The birthmark on my left cheek, once called a curse, was now a symbol of the journey I'd taken. It was no longer something I wanted to hide. It was a badge of a warrior, a man who rose from the ashes of contempt to write his own story. I thought back to those days when I walked through crowds with my head bowed, cried silently in my basement room, heard mockery from my own family. I remembered my father's cold looks, David's mocking smiles, my mother's brutal silence, and Emily calling me weird. Those memories no longer hurt. They were fuel, the fire that drove me through the hardest years, from a rejected boy to a man leading an empire. Clearway Services is no longer just a company, it's my legacy. I turned a despised job into a profession to be proud of, where thousands of employees are trained to work with dedication and professionalism. I expanded the company internationally, signing contracts with 5-star hotels, major stadiums, even government buildings. But more than that, I created a community of people like me, once overlooked, once pushed aside, but now standing tall, knowing their worth. I no longer keep in touch with the Harris family. Not because I hate them. I don't. I simply understand that family isn't about blood. It's about acceptance and love. My true family is Clearway's employees, the friends who stood by me, the partners who trusted me. They're the ones who see Wayne Harris not through a birthmark, but through my will, through what I've achieved. They're the ones who raised their glasses at my Thanksgiving feast, laughed at my stories, and clapped at my words of gratitude. They are my home. One afternoon, while walking through my estate, a young Clearway employee, a girl named Mia, approached me. She clutched a small notebook, much like the one I used to scribble my ideas in. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice trembling, I want to thank you. I used to think I was nothing, just a cleaner. But you made me believe I could do more." I looked into her eyes, saw the same spark I once saw in myself, and smiled. "Mia," I said, "you're part of this story. Keep writing it in your own way." In that moment, I realized my journey wasn't just about me. It was about people like Mia, like Tommy, like all of Clearway's employees searching for their own paths. I didn't just build a company, I was building hope, showing the world that anyone, no matter their background or scars, could rise and triumph. I returned to my balcony, the sunset now painting the valley in brilliant orange. I stood there, breathing deeply, and whispered to myself, "Finally, I'm free." But that freedom wasn't just escaping my family's contempt or society's judgmental stares. It was liberation from the doubts that once imprisoned me. The voices in my head that said I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy. I had overcome them step by step, and now I stood here not as red-faced, not as a failure, but as Wayne Harris, a man who wrote his own destiny. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Clearway will keep growing, or maybe I'll find new challenges, but one thing I know: I'll never stop moving forward. Not to prove anything to the Harris family, not to make the world take notice, but because I've learned this life is mine and I'll live it to the fullest. As the sunset faded, leaving a sky sparkling with stars, I thought of my grandmother. She once said my birthmark was God's mark, a sign I was meant for something special. I'm not sure about God, but I know she was right about one thing. I am special, not because of the birthmark, but because of my will, my perseverance, my heart that never surrendered. I smiled, touched my left cheek, feeling the rough skin of the birthmark, and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for believing in me."